Okay, then in March, we'll talk about this application. At that hearing, there was some questions raised about whether the application was complete.
I'm sorry, it's just hard.
Stop it.
But
I know that they can't hear
I
me.
know, but we do need to have it clear at least some of it. So if it's advertised, it will turn us. Is there how big of the other one?
There you go. Better.
That's
Okay. In March,
guide.
we talked about this application, and there were some questions about whether the application was complete. The planning commission tabled the matter until the applicant could bring a complete set of information.
Also, there's lights. There's about 10 seats up front. You can come up. Ray, sit in the front. You can hear better. There you go.
That sounds good.
That's good.
That one wasn't in all. Okay. In March, we had a meeting. We talked about this application. There was some concern that it wasn't complete. The planning commission tabled it. This hearing is to discuss the rest of the items of the applicant that we bought. The property is 160 acres. It's on Henry's Lake Flats. It's way north. It's about 2/3 of a mile north of Big Springs Bluff. The applicant wants to do 32 lots total in 2 phases. The first phase is 15 lots. Second phase is 17 lots. The decision before P&Z is whether to approve the preliminary plat for this subdivision. The preliminary plat is our subdivision process has several steps. One is preliminary plat approval and then a final plat. Preliminary plat allows an applicant to understand that their application is capable of being approved for final plat, and then they go do the expensive design, the roads and the infrastructure, that stuff. All right. On your second page, there's standards of review. Those are for your use when you're deliberating over these applications or some of the portions of the code that apply to this decision. On page 5, there's a section review and analysis. That's where I'm going to start. Subdivisions are allowed in a rural-based zone. The applicant presented a sketch plan in January and then presented his preliminary plat March 29th. He just covers that. The applicant has now submitted following additional information and received this ahead of the meeting: an updated site context map, updated existing resource and site analysis plan, updated preliminary plat, updated drainage and erosion plan, updated preliminary open space ownership maps, draft development agreement, draft covenants and restrictions, preliminary master layout, nutrient pathogen study, and agency review correspondence. The applicant appears to meet the typical performance standards for a subdivision in this zone. They meet the density requirement. There's 20 lots per 100 acres. That's the maximum amount of density our ordinance allows in this zone. Property has 160 acres, which allows a maximum of 32 lots. They meet the 65% open space requirement. There's an explanation of that there. The applicant will be providing the required connections to the county's sewer system for each lot. There are no septic systems in this subdivision. The applicant will build a county standard road to provide access for each lot. There will be a second access built with the second phase. The applicant will provide underground power service connection for each lot. Detailed engineering plans are not required for preliminary plat approval. They're required for the final plat stage. Section 4, complying with the Fremont County Comprehensive Plan. We've discussed that extensively. We went over it in detail in the March 29th hearing. I'm not talking about that today. You can refer to March 29th for that, to review that. Section 5, review and analysis of the written comments. Comments were received for the March 29th hearing. Written comments were extensive for that hearing. We have copies of that. If you need another copy of that, we can get it to you. You should review those again before you make a decision. Or at least review your notes or think about what was there. Comments received for this hearing. Written comments received for this hearing have been provided to you. Many of the points raised are similar to comments made for the March hearing. Quite a few of the written statements are copies or near copies of each other. This makes reading them tedious, but you still need to do it because you need to deliberate over these when you are making a decision. And because so many of the statements repeat points made, we're not going to go through the comments in detail. You're going to touch on a few of the main points that you're going to need to address as you make this decision. First, under section 6, item A, agency letters. The number of comments claimed that the application was incomplete because it does not include review and comment from most applicable agencies. The agency letter requirement, item 2 under A, is for the applicant to ask the agencies for review and comment. It merely requires the applicant to provide a copy of the proposal to the agency and ask if the agency wants to comment. The agency is not required to comment in detail. In fact, the ordinance says if an applicable agency has no comment, a statement from that agency acknowledging such will be required. The code does not require the applicant to get a permit or any other official permission from any of those agencies at this stage of the process. All it requires is for them to show the application or the proposal to those agencies and ask if the agency has any. Item 3, comments that agency reviews were not adequate are contrary to the standards of development code. Despite some claims were in comment, the applicant has submitted the required letters. The requirement of the development code is that they be included with the application materials. But as even a no comment satisfies the requirement of the code, there's nothing about these agencies' letters that someone opposed to this application can come and say, well, the agency letter isn't good enough. If they have it, they've satisfied the requirement. Arguing that the application shouldn't be approved because an agency response is not good enough is contrary to the standards of the code. Denial of a permit on that basis would be a violation of our code if that were the sole reason for denial. Most other jurisdictions in the state treat non-response as no comment. That's the way staff has handled this in the past. If an applicant went to an agency and they didn't give them a response, we treated that as no comment. The county does not have the authority to compel those agencies to do anything. If they don't want to review an applicant's project, they don't want a letter to say so, to say that they have no comment, they don't have to. Our ordinance says the applicant has to get that, but we can't actually make the agencies do it. This is a problem with our ordinance. In this case, the applicant got those comments from every agency. B, master plans. A couple of the comments expressed the belief that the applicant hasn't adequately master planned the entire contiguous property. In chapter 5, 5.57, there's a requirement that if a property owner is applying for a permit on a piece of property and they have other pieces of property that touch it, they have to do a master plan for all of that property. The applicant has submitted a master plan. They will explain that master plan. I'm not going to do it for them. It's their application. They're going to do it. The staff report does not have a specific analysis of the master plan because master plan in the code is not adequately defined or explained by the text of the development. It's possible to read that section as requiring everything that is required for an application on the parcel the owner wants to develop, but for all of their property, even if they don't have any intention to use any of the other property. I think that's the problem, and I'm going to illustrate why here, this example. Suppose that a farmer wants to carve off an underperforming acre or two so that one of the kids can build a house. What does the master plan require? If a traffic study is required for the parcel being developed, the master plan rule seems to say that they have to do a transportation study for all of the property owned by the applicant. We wouldn't usually do that for a 1 lot or 2 lot subdivision because they're not creating enough traffic to bother them. But suppose this farmer has 600 acres. Now they have a big potential traffic analysis. Do they have to do that whole study even if we wouldn't do it for the actual application that they want? They don't want to develop any of the rest of the 600 acres. So is it a traffic study of an existing farm, in which case, why bother? There's no additional impact. Or does the study have to look at all 600 acres as if the owner were going to build it at the same density as the requested lot? In that case, does that mean they have to design a street layout for the whole 600 acres so the transportation study can figure out where the roads go and where they'll connect to the county's existing network? Similarly, if the subdivision rules require drainage and stormwater plans for the platted area, does the master plan require the entire 600 acres to have those plans? A drainage plan for the farm operation or for 600 acres worth of subdivisions? What if there's a question about whether a portion of the property is a wetland? For 1 lot, they might just move the property boundaries so that they're away from any possible wetlands. They wouldn't even have to bother with a delineation or study, because the master plan rule require them to delineate any possible wetland on the farm. There are easily half a dozen different studies, plans, designs, etc., that could be required. That lot is going to cost $3 million before anybody ever even gets to build it. But we're not even done yet. If an applicant submits a master plan to accompany a short plat subdivision, does the approval of the currently sought permit lock them into that master plan? Suppose our farmer's engineer lays out conceptual subdivisions in order to complete the traffic study, but later decides he wants to do a solar farm. Are they going to be told in the hearing on the solar farm, you can't do a solar farm because you master planned this property as a subdivision? They didn't want to subdivide the property. They only wanted to subdivide 1 or 2 lots. That's why the master plan rule is the problem. It's not clear about what you have to do to satisfy the master plan. Applicants should have to prepare plans for and address the impacts of the development that they're applying for. Inventing excuses to make them do more work than is required by the actual development that they're seeking to do is a recipe for trouble. No other county in Idaho that I've been able to find has this requirement, and for good reason. If we're not very, very careful about how we apply the master plan rule, our decisions are likely to be arbitrary and temporary. Fortunately, we need to interpret our own ordinances. If you say, like I do, that a master plan needs to address whatever the applicant says they intend to do with the rest of the property at the time of their application, then that's what it means. Because there's nothing in the land code since we're supposed to require differently. If you do that, some people are going to be upset. They're going to say, you didn't do the master plan rule right. At the same time, someone who's opposed to an application will always think that you did the master plan rule wrong. Every time. So, as you listen to the applicant explain his master plan, keep an open mind, come up with a reasonable basis for whatever decision you make about what he submitted. Item C, wells in subdivisions. Several comments argued that the subdivision plan was contrary to state law because of the changes passed by the legislature earlier this year. Senate Bill 1083. New rules adopted by the legislature changed some of the way that water obtained by domestic exemption is allowed to be used inside subdivisions. In general, these comments gave the impression that the new law requires subdivisions to have community water systems. Thus, they argued the application should be denied because it proposes individual wells. This law is very new. There have been lots of opinions about what it would do, with very little solid information. I know, I've been looking for it ever since they passed it, asking whoever might have an answer. Recently, just 2.5 weeks ago, actually, IDWR released guidance on how this is all going to work. Attachment B in your staff report has that document from IDWR. You should read it, and skim through it, but basically, everyone who said that the new law prohibited individual wells and subdivisions was wrong. IDWR is very clear about that. The only effect that 1083 will have on this subdivision is that property owners will not be able to irrigate any property outside of the home with a domestic well. They would need water right for that. Staff may have some suggestions about conditions of approval that can help avoid possible confusion because of approval, but the commenters are wrong when they say that the new law means the subdivision can't have individual wells. D, wetlands. The applicant's proposal includes a detailed examination of the property to determine the location and extent of wetlands. So, Keller did the study, right? Kegel. Some comments for today's hearing ignore all of that evidence and claim the property is mostly wetlands. To counter the evidence provided by the applicant, they offer merely their opinion that it's mostly wetlands. This wetlands thing happens to be a really good example of how to weigh evidence and compare claims, so we have to resolve disputed facts. Remember, in June, in our June 2nd meeting, we talked about reasoned decisions. One of the things you have to do as part of making a decision on an application is resolve disputed or contested fact. Here you have two competing claims. The property is mostly wetlands, or the property has enough non-wetlands that the development is feasible. For P&Z's purposes, whether the property is mostly wetlands or mostly not is a question of fact. Questions of fact are resolved by reference to substantial evidence on the record. Many of the things people say in comments to their hearings are matters of personal opinion. One person can believe that the property is mostly wetlands, and another that it's mostly not. Those are both the opinions, and both people are fine to believe that. But when you have to resolve the dispute, you have to do so, or it's best if you do so, on a stronger basis than just an opinion. Opinion is usually not adequate to satisfy the requirement of substantial evidence. You remember that during the June 2nd meeting, you have to resolve this dispute. You have to figure out which of these you think is correct, and then give a reasoned explanation of how you came to that decision, and base that explanation on substantial evidence on the record. Meaning point to something that is more solid than just an opinion to support the fact you're finding when you decide which of the two claims is correct. So there's some evidence on the record. There's a detailed analysis by the environmental team of where wetlands are and are not on the property. We go to item E there. What other evidence might support a claim that the property is mostly wetlands? Well, the county's map server has a layer that shows that it's wetland. We'll pull that up. On the map, the pink is, according to our map, wetlands. This layer on the map is not based on a detailed analysis of any property. It's based on kind of a guess from what some old aerial images show. It's a map of what might be wetland. So when an applicant comes in, we show them the map and we say, look, your property has or may have wetlands. You need to figure that out before you get very far into the process, because you have to comply with any applicable wetland rule, regardless of what our map says. But also, if our map says a property is a wetland and it's not really a wetland, our map doesn't make it a wetland. All right, so if you go out and look at it and you see that it's a wetland, isn't that evidence? Yes, that is evidence. And there's two problems. Is because there are some wetlands on a parcel, doesn't mean it's all wetlands. There's a very specific definition of what a wetland is. In the environmental analysis, there's an explanation of what that is. If someone goes out and looks at a property, that's great. They see what they think is wetland. But going out and looking is what that environmental team did. They dug 107 holes on the property and looked at the plants. They sent them off to study. The study explains everything they did. They went out and looked for two. All right, so what if someone comes in this hearing and offers professional testimony? That could be good evidence. You'll want to ask them some questions, and so you'll be able to weigh these. Weighing evidence like this is how you resolve disputed facts. You'll need to do that. I'm not going to tell you which way to go. The comments may be right. Maybe it is mostly wetlands. You'll need to identify the basis for making that finding and applying that. All right, E, open space is not compliant. Several commenters voiced concern the open space shown on the plat does not meet the standard for open space established by the development code, because they claim the code does not allow open space to be located on individual plots. The language most of those comments use is long gone or copied from an example I did there under E1. We go down to E2. Contrary to the inference of the comments, the actual language in the development code says open space may be owned and managed individually, owned by an association, corporation, or trust, a municipality, a recognized land trust for conservancy, or in combination of any of the above. The later part of that section includes a provision that open space may be placed in large privately owned conservancy lots. But nothing about that, or any of the other parts of that section, indicate that that's the only possible private ownership arrangement. There's one thing you can do to have an individually owned property that's open space, but it's not necessarily the only thing. Regardless, the plain language of 5.59.010 is that individual ownership of the open space is allowed. All right. Recommendations. We recommend that after the hearing closes, after the comments portion closes, you table this. There's a lot of information. You shouldn't hurry through this decision. You have to identify all the contested facts and how to resolve them. Table this application to your next meeting. Review the information that you received tonight, that you received prior to tonight. Come to your next meeting ready to discuss the questions that you have and how to resolve those facts. All right. You'll have to identify the contested facts, so the points of dispute. And then you'll have to answer questions like, is the end use being requested? Is it allowed in a rule-based zone? Is the applicant meeting the standards? Are there concerns about the proposal? If yes, are there conditions that can mitigate those concerns? Those conditions should be based on standards in the code. What evidence have you heard that supports the answers to those questions? And have different speakers provided conflicting evidence? Is that evidence solid or conclusory? It's a lot of stuff to do. Don't feel like you have to get all of it done tonight. It's fine to table this. In fact, I suggest you do. Give yourself time to prepare or complete deliberation. Following the deliberation, you'll make a motion. If you deny any part of the application, you'll have to explain which performance standards were not met and what changes the applicant can make to get it approved. You can ask for help doing that. E, if you decide to approve, you'll need to carefully explain how the application complies with performance standards and if there are conditions that you need to apply. You can ask for help with that too. There's a list here of possible conditions as we're preparing a staff report that might be useful. You may find that helpful during your deliberation. That's all staff has. You have a lot of information. You're going to hear more information tonight. Then you'll need to take time to fully analyze it and decide on it. You have questions from the president.
Questions? Okay.
Thanks.
Right. Now we begin our presentation from our owners over here. And you can't interrupt us. You can't ask them any questions. Write down your questions. You can speak. They'll be asked. Once we do go to the group of people who are asking questions, presenting, you cannot speak again after that. If you have not signed up back there, you can never speak at this meeting. So make sure you signed up if you really want. So now we're going to have, I think, Doug first. Doug,
Afternoon, or I guess it's evening. We on? Is it hearing all right?
oh, stay right up. So my
How about now? Yeah, okay. Little feedback and feedback, okay. Good afternoon, my name is Doug Button, member of BK Land LLC.